Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this CAFII webinar on the future of travel and travel insurance as the world emerges from COVID-19. We are delighted to have four very knowledgeable and authoritative panelists with us today. Elliot Draga, Vice President of the Travel Health Insurance Association, or CAFII, Sheila Burns from the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association, or the CLHIA, David Moorcroft, travel blogger and CAFII's media consultant, and last but not least, Kadia Umutonewazi from Manulife, who is the chair of the CAFII Travel Insurance Experts Committee. Thank you so much to all four of you for joining us today. My name is Keith Martin, and I am co-executive director of the Canadian Association of Financial Institutions in Insurance, or CAFII. On behalf of myself and my co-executive director colleague, Brendan Wicks, and the CAFII Board of Directors, thank you for joining our webinar today. CAFII is a not-for-profit association dedicated to the development of an open and flexible insurance marketplace. Our 15 members include the insurance arm of Canada's major banks and credit unions, along with their insurer business partners, which underwrite credit protection insurance and travel insurance. Now, this is the fifth in our 2022 series of webinars, which have been focused primarily on issues related to life and health insurance policy and regulation in Canada. I do want to mention that today's webinar will be recorded and it will be posted on our CAFII website in the near future. So if you have colleagues who couldn't join today but would like to see the webinar, they will be able to do so on our website. Now, if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to our panelists during the Q&A session or even during the session itself, of today's webinar, please send the questions to me as the host using the Q&A function of Zoom, which you can see at the bottom of the Zoom panel. And I will pose those questions to them on your behalf. Unless you specifically request in your question that you wish to be identified as its source, I will pose all questions on an anonymous basis. And just before we get underway, I want to extend a special welcome to some VIP guest attendees. In addition to many representatives from our 15 CAFII member companies and from our 10 CAFII associates, which supply essential professional and related services to our association and its members, we have attendees today from allied industry associations, such as the CLHIA and CEIA, and from insurance and financial services regulators and policymakers from across Canada, including the British Columbia Financial Services Authority, or the BCFSA, the Alberta Treasury Board and Finance, the Alberta Insurance Council of Manitoba, the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, or FSRA, Quebec's Autorité des Marchés Financiers, or the AMF, the New Brunswick Financial and Consumer Services Commission, or the FCNB, the Office of the Superintendent of Insurance, Government of Nova Scotia, and the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, or OSFI. Welcome to you all. Well, let's jump right into the webinar, and I want to start with a question for David, which all of our panelists will then jump in on. David, has travel fully recovered? Are we back out of the pandemic lows and fully back into the situation prior to the pandemic, or is there still some catch-up to be done? David?
The answer is clearly no, we have not recovered. And I'm going to refer you to a study done by the UN World Travel Organization, which was released this September, and it compared international arrivals globally from January to May 2022 to the same period in 2019. Globally, we've only recovered 46% of that volume. In the Americas, North and South America, we've recovered 60%. In Europe, 64%. Asia and Pacific, only 10%, which is a reflection of Japan being closed and China being closed. So clearly the statistics show we have not recovered fully.
But it's better in North America, you're saying, than in Asia.
Oh yeah, Europe and Americas, we've recovered 60% of pre-pandemic level travel. Asia is terrible, only 10%, but globally it averages out to 46%. So we're not even at half of what we used to be pre-pandemic.
Kadia, Sheila, Elliot, do you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the discrepancy in recovery is as David said, a bit polarizing. If you look at TSA numbers for the past month, so looking at year-over-year comparisons from October, TSA checkpoint travel numbers are almost identical in October 2022 to what they were in October 2019. So I think that, depending on the metric you look at, you're going to see varying different responses to the overall recovery of travel. From a Canadian perspective, travel spend, as published by StatsCan, in 2022 is at about 75% of what it was if you look at Q4 of 2019. So, but again, there's currency implications, there's inflation, which I know we're going to touch on later. So there's other factors that play into that. But I think the most important thing is that when you compare it to 2020, let's say, there's been significant recovery in travel over the past 2 years.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's a bit too early to say we're on this positive upswing that will stay that way, because some of the travel this year might have been, using up vouchers that were going to expire if there was, trips that were postponed because of the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see if, how people experience that and if they continue to purchase additional trips after this.
Patty, I saw that you were going to jump in.
Yes, exactly. And I agree with my colleagues, especially with Sheila. We did see a surge, but again, it's with that pent-up travel demand that had been delayed. And now it will be interesting to see, once that settles, what is travel behavior going to look like in the future. But I can definitely see an upward trend in recovery, and we'll just have to wait it out and see. But yeah, it is definitely recovering, and hopefully by 2023 we'll be back to normal, if not more.
That's interesting, because we are all hoping to see a full recovery from prior to the pandemic, and yet there are new headwinds now that we're facing, and one of them is, of course, interest rates and inflation. I know that we recently had a webinar with Leslie Martin, Senior Vice President of Polera, and her research has found that people are saying they're going to cut back on discretionary travel in the next year due to inflation. Is that something you've observed, Elliot? Do you want to give us your sense of that?
Yeah, I think inflation is interesting. I think, you have to look at the factors that are driving it. And of course, you also have to look at the segmentation of the travel market to see, where there's maybe going to be, some adverse impact of inflation to travel. So I think the first point there, in terms of what's actually driving inflation, and I was just reading, the governor of the Bank of Canada gave a speech in Halifax a few days ago, and it's very much demand outpacing supply in a lot of product and service industries, and travel is no different than that. We've all heard about, this trend of revenge tourism, and people that have accrued savings over the past couple of years and have a pent-up demand for travel, and are facing supply shortages in airports, airlines, so on and so forth. So I think that from that sense, I don't know that inflation, even though costs are increasing, we've moved so far up the demand curve that there's still going to be ample supply of eager travelers that want to get out there. And I think the other market segment that's interesting to look at here is snowbirds. Snowbirds are generally, elderly Canadians who are going down south, and where you might think that inflation would have an adverse impact on snowbirds, there might actually be a net interest gain for snowbirds, right? They're typically not having as much of a debt profile as younger traveling Canadians. They might have more savings accrued, and so inflation might actually benefit them and encourage them to travel a little bit more. Now, obviously, the Canadian dollar right now isn't going to help that travel trend, but purely looking at inflation, there might not be as much of an adverse impact.
I'd do a hot follow-up with David on that last issue, Elliot, because I know in preparing for this webinar, David was telling us that there is a segment of older Canadians in Canada and the US that basically feel they've lost out on 2 years of their life. They feel that the runway is only so long, and they're just going to go and spend whatever it takes to have the experiences they want while they're still healthy enough to do so. David, could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's true from my experience and my knowledge. So people over 55 who were getting ready to do all that travel they had saved up for all of their life, then had 2 years of it wiped out, and it frightens some people, especially if they're getting older. They're running out of travel runway, to excuse the pun, but they're running out of that lifetime runway for travel. So I give you my own experience. I've done 5 different trips this year. I'm going to be doing 4 or 5 next year. I have friend that's doing around the world airplane trip. Most of you know this person. So yeah, it's age relative. The other point I want to make is I want to go back to that UN World Travel Organization. As part of their study, they also polled travel experts around the world about when they thought travel would recover to pre-pandemic levels, and whether anything going on now, inflation, high interest rates, high oil prices, the war in Ukraine, would affect that. 61%, those factors are affecting it, and we won't return to pre-pandemic levels of global travel until 2024.
Interesting. And Katia, on the issue of inflation, you had said in your initial comments that you thought that there would be a full recovery, in the near future, and we're definitely moving in that direction. Is inflation not a concern in your view?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, definitely. And I agree with David, because what we've noticed is that. Yeah, so we have noticed as well that the impact of inflation is isolated by age or by demographics. And what
I don't know if it's just me, or is Katia cutting out a bit for you?
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll move on, Katia, and hopefully your internet will kick back in. Sheila, last word to you.
Just that it might change how some people travel. So especially within Canada and the US, people may have opted to drive certain distances in the past, and with gas prices, and then some airlines offering some rather inexpensive flights, people might be switching their means of travel, which kind of evens out, I guess, a bit, but increases the flights.
Okay, excellent. And Sheila, we'll go to you on the next question. Tell us a bit about what you think the situation is right now about the ability of government services to adapt to resurgent travel. We've all read about the horror stories at the airports. Canadian border security had some issues as well. Do you think that's sorting itself out, Sheila?
Well, I think a lot of people feel that Canada held on to the ArriveCan app a little too long. So now that that is no longer a factor, I think that's going to be considered a positive thing, and help people move through customs and things a little more quickly, and not have problems if they weren't aware of the app. And I haven't been to Pearson since this, but I've heard that Pearson now has a dashboard on their website, so you can look at their security times, their U.S. customs times, counter check times. And I took a look at it this morning, and everything today looked normal. Now, I don't know what normal means. I don't know what the time range on that is. So let me know if anybody else has used this and found that maybe their normal isn't what you would consider normal.
Yeah, so Sheila, I can say from having been through Pearson in the last 2 weeks, normal is definitely an extended norm, maybe a new normal. That's the term that we've all been using over the past couple of years. There's a lot longer service delay, checking counters, security lineups. My Nexus card sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, because they just don't have staff ready to process those queues. So I think that there are staffing shortages across the board in a lot of different services within airports, and I think that hasn't yet been solved yet. So we are still going to continue to experience these sort of delays.
Yeah, I would agree with Elliot. It's a staffing problem. And some days are worse than others. We've seen that. I know my experience was a lot worse in March when I was coming back from Barbados, and they were struggling. We were on the plane for 45 minutes. They wouldn't let us off. 60 minutes or more in the customs and immigration area. My two other international arrivals in August and September were much better. But if you come back on the wrong day, you could be in trouble.
Okay, thank you for that. Welcome back, Katia. Can you hear us? All right. Well, we'll ask a question of Katia in a few moments, and hopefully she'll be able to hear us. Let's take a quick pause, folks, and go to our first poll. So this is a poll for the audience. I'm going to ask everybody who's on the call to answer, and the question is: are you cutting back on personal and/or family travel plans at this time due to inflation and resulting price increases? So let me launch that and give you a few moments to answer. All right, people are just answering as we speak. Now, one thing that we need to consider is, of course, these polls are not scientific. It's a way for us to get a sense of what's going on with the people who are attending this webinar. But for example, a lot of the people that are on this webinar are in the travel insurance industry. And so I would assume they're slightly more likely to travel than others. And yet, I'm going to end the poll, and I am going to share the results. You can see it's nearly dead even. Despite what I just said, about half of the participants in this webinar are saying they are cutting back on family travel plans or personal travel plans due to inflation. Does that surprise you, panelists?
It doesn't surprise me, but as I said before, I would think the statistics would be higher saying no, they're not cutting back with older, and it would be maybe different for the younger people.
I can say, as a younger person with a 20-month-old son who is about to not be free to fly anymore, we're going to cram in a few family trips while he can still fly for free. But I think in general, I think that sort of split down the middle speaks a lot to the continued uncertainty and the fact that there are, even though there is growing demand or pent-up demand, that you've got global oil prices, inflation, a lot of factors are continuing to hinder this sort of inevitable recovery that we were all anticipating.
How about you, Sheila? Does this surprise you?
Well, it surprises me a bit because I do feel like I get a lot of people postponing meetings and things because they're off to sunny places this time of year.
Right.
So maybe it's just my jealousy around that thinks everyone's traveling. But I guess, it's coming back after the pandemic. Like Elliot said, there might have been some uncertainty. And then when inflation, is added to that, maybe people are really just waiting and hoping that it will be less expensive if they wait until the spring or another time. So I guess there's more to that than just a yes or no. It's the why, right, that we'd like to know.
Okay, thank you for that. We were talking a few moments ago about government services, including the airports and spotty performance. I just want to ask a quick question about passport applications, and I want to share a personal story that I think might amuse you. I renewed the passports, for my two youngest kids using a sort of fast track process where I think you have 3 months after the passport expires to renew it, and if you do it within that window, you don't need to provide all the usual documentation like birth certificates and other additional information. So off I went, sent in the passport application using this fast track, and the passport services didn't process it in the 3-month time period, and so returned it to me because I had failed to get it processed in the time period which allowed for it to be fast tracked, and told me that I had to send in all the documentation now because I had not done it in that 3-month time period. So I've certainly had my own personal experience with passport applications taking longer than they should, and some of these bureaucratic challenges. What are your thoughts? I mean, is that back on track? I know it must have been an enormous challenge for the passport services, just the amount of applications they had in such a short period of time, and the sort of resourcing issue that created. Sheila, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Like everything else, staffing is going to impact this. You know, people not being able to work because they're sick, people that have left for other jobs. It's really impacting all of us. I think that Service Canada has responded to it in a way. They've opened up more locations where you can do a 10-day pickup drop-off passport application, with proof of travel. So to get that faster, somewhere closer to you. I know Kingston was one. Some more smaller towns have these offices now. So hopefully that will help. There were a few sort of pockets where they opened a few and then a little while later opened a few more. So that I hope does make a difference. It's interesting, Keith, your comment, because I really feel like there should be some sort of reward for people who are not waiting to the last minute, not, scrambling to get their passport because their trip's coming up next week. People who are really saying, hey, this is a good opportunity to just do it because I've got this 3-month window, or because I know it's going to expire in the next 6 months or something. People who don't have a trip planned but are just diligently updating their passport, they should have some benefit there.
That's a good point. In fairness, I do think that a lot of different sectors have been overwhelmed, and sometimes we're a little critical of federal government, but I mean the private sector's had its challenges as well, and we've talked about, for example, airports, and part of the problem at airports, I believe, is a shortage of pilots. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely something that a lot of different sectors have had to try to adjust to. Elliot, David, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, sorry, you go ahead, David.
I would say, I think what they've become very good at, Passport Canada, is people who need it quickly. My daughter applied, she's still waiting 5 months, but a friend of mine, who I won't name because he'll be very embarrassed, he's actually on a cruise in South America right now. The day before he was leaving, he washed his hiking pants and forgot he had left his passport in the pocket. And when it came out of the laundry, it was destroyed. He was sure he was going to miss this very expensive trip. So he got up very early in the morning, got down to the passport place on Victoria Street in downtown Toronto, was there at 7 o'clock. And by 11 noon, he'd had a new passport. He got on a plane at 4 and went down to South America. So if you really need it urgently or within a certain period, and you can prove you're traveling, from what I've heard, they're very good.
That's amazing. Elliot?
Yeah, so I mean, I was just about to say, I guess we can thank the federal government for encouraging folks to travel, because I know for us, we went to go get our son his first passport and were turned away simply because we didn't have proof of travel. And so we went and booked a trip and then took that paperwork back to the passport office and I guess went down the expedited path. So it's I suppose the right way to prioritize and triage things, but it obviously does create long wait times. And I was looking at the passport processing stats on Passport Canada's website, and you can see October is the first month where they've actually processed more passport applications than they've received. So you're dealing with months and months and months of excess backlog that are still going to continue to be bottlenecked. And all credit goes to the folks who are actually doing the processing. I know they're trying to staff up as much as they can, but there's still a lot of overtime hours being put in by those folks to get through this. So it's not going to change anytime soon, I don't think.
All right, thank you for that. And I do want to remind attendees on this webinar that we do welcome your questions. You'll see at the bottom of the Zoom, there's a panel that includes Q&A. So if you click on that and write your question, it'll come to me and I'll pose it on your behalf. So please do go ahead and ask questions that you'd like this panel to respond to. Well, I'm going to go to another poll question. We'd like to hear from our attendees on this issue. When traveling this year, have you or anyone in your family experienced any last-minute flight cancellations, lost or significantly delayed baggage, passport issuance delays, being stuck on a plane for hours after landing before being allowed to disembark and enter the airport, hour-long lineups to get processed through customs, or arrive can issues after an international flight or at the land border? Quite a list there, but it is a list of some of the pain that we've heard that people have experienced. Has this happened to any of you? So we'll just give you a few more moments, and then we'll see what people say. All right, good. Well, we've had a good response, and it's interesting results. 70% of people say that they have experienced some of these troubles, but on the other hand, and it's quite a long list, 30% said no. Now, I don't know if that's because they haven't traveled or because they've had a good experience. Does that sound about right to the panel?
I've experienced a few of those, so I'd definitely be in the yes column.
Yeah, me too.
All right, excellent. We're now going to move on to something more general, which is the travel and travel experience. And we know there have been so many changes since the pandemic, dramatic changes in terms of people's expectations around workplace, strong pressures on businesses to allow for a minimum hybrid or continue to work at home. Our Polera webinar last month had some really interesting statistics on this issue, including one statistic that 45% of women said that they would quit their jobs if they were forced to return full-time to the office place. So some dramatic changes have occurred in a lot of societal areas. I'd like to ask the panel, what has changed in terms of travel? How do you think travel will change going forward? And Katia, we'll try to start with you. I'm so sorry you're having some internet troubles because we do value your insights. I'm hoping that it's better, and maybe you could jump in on this question.
I know yeah. Apologies.
No worries.
What we have seen, so I'll just talk about, maybe I'll come at it from an insurance perspective.
Okay.
What we have seen in behaviors, what we used to have to do, even in training our travel agency partners or brokers, they had to initiate the conversation about travel insurance. What we have seen change these days is the client is actually initiating the conversation about insurance, asking their agent, their broker, about what kind of protection will go along with their trip. Okay, so that is really a huge trend that we're seeing, and we can expect that to continue. From the perspective of travel behavior, we have also noticed that there is a lot of need or a lot of will to check off a lot of large items from the bucket list. We are seeing a huge surge in what we call large quotes, large trips, long trips. So it is really changing from that perspective, but coming at it from an insurance, an underwriter, we are seeing that insurance is top of mind, and when clients are thinking about travel, they're also thinking about insurance at the same time. We've never seen that before.
Well, in a sense, that's an encouraging sign, isn't it, Katia?
Yeah, very interesting, very encouraging, and a very interesting trend to see. We are now finding that we are having to be more attuned to travel insurance and what that means, because every client is asking about their own situation. And really, you have to now understand insurance to be able to cater to that client who's going into the details about what coverage they will have on their trip. And again, apologies for this internet connection. Of all the times it could have failed me, it chooses to do that now. So.
Yeah, that's just life, isn't it? Elliot, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, well, I think I'll just start by extending on Katie's point about travel insurance. So we did a canvas of our members, and I think what our members are experiencing is that not only are there a higher volume of policies, being purchased, and again, reiterating Katie's point that a lot of it is inbound demand for insurance quotes and questions around policies, but also that there's longer time being spent during the quoting process to ensure that the right coverage is actually being associated with the individual's travel plan. So I think there was a lot of folks at the start of 2020 who experienced canceled trips, delayed trips, and are taking those experiences forward and making sure that this time around, when they go to restart their travel plans and book their next vacation, that they want to ensure that they understand their policy and that they're getting the right type of coverage for the type of travel that they're going to be doing. So, it's both an increased penetration of insurance, but also, I would say a higher degree of fit between, policy and coverage.
I'm going to take it from a completely different angle. And this may have implications for travel medical insurance, but I wish I was 10 years younger, because a number of countries, Portugal, the most recent one, has been offering work visas for people who work on the internet. If you have contracts, I think Portugal is you have 30,000 worth of signed contracts that you can go and live there and work and not have to go through all the regular immigration stuff. And you can stay as long as you want. Now, I think that's terrific. I mean, for someone in my job that, once the world discovered we could work online and we didn't have to be face to face, this creates a tremendous opportunity for people to travel and work. That has some implications, I'm sure, for the travel insurance industry.
So actually, David, I'm going to piggyback off that, because Thea just hosted an event a few weeks ago. It was an innovation event where we invited a series of speakers, and one of them founded a tech company in Toronto who encouraged their employees to embrace this sort of nomadic work-life style. But there are serious tax implications to being based abroad. And so it can't really be something that is, extended ad nauseum, where somebody can just go and be somewhere for an indefinite period of time. There does need to be still, that cap. Obviously, from an insurance perspective, we want to make sure that individuals are covered when they do travel abroad, whether it's for work or for pleasure. But I think from a taxation, perspective, there still is some rules that need to be adhered to, especially if it's an employee who's working for a Canadian organization who's going to go work abroad.
Right. It's never as simple as it seems, right? Sheila, last word to you on this.
Yeah, and it's not just travel insurance that can impact too. There's a lot of questions from employers about whether they can continue to cover people under their group benefits plans if they're not, working from Canada year round. And, there might be timeframes that are put on that people are looking into, but you can also lose your provincial health care coverage if you're not in Canada for the right amount of time. So yeah, lots there to think about, but it's obviously an interest, David, like you said, because there's a lot of conversation about that out there.
Okay, excellent. We have a couple of questions from our attendees from the audience, and one of them I can answer. It says, you stated a problem with airports due to a shortage of pilots. Why is there a shortage? And I think the reason is because of the lack of travel for a couple of years. And so quite a few pilots got laid off. Some of them quit, some retired. And now when travel's picking up again, the pool of pilots has diminished, and it's not a profession where you can just sort of train people quickly. So we've seen this throughout society, that there is a whole series of areas where there are rapid adjustments by the private sector, maybe too drastic an adjustment, and then rebounding is proving to be a really big problem. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the rental car issue. I mean, there's just a massive shortage of rental cars. As a result, if you can get one, they're very expensive. That's because rental car companies diminished their stockpile dramatically. And then when they wanted to rebuild, there's a great shortage of new cars. And in fact, I'm in the car market and I can't buy a car. It's just very difficult to get a new car. That's because of a chip shortage. And the chip shortage is due to a series of things, including a supply problem in Taiwan due to a great reduction, but also gaming exploded during the pandemic. And of course, gaming requires a lot of chips, and there was a tremendous increase in demand and that's resulted in a inequilibrium and a lack of supply for the other industries that now need it, like the car industry. So very interesting stuff. Do any of you want to sort of jump in on that and offer your own perspective on some of these great shortages and some of the adjustment problems we're seeing not just with government but in the private sector as well?
Well, I think just on the pilot topic, it's extremely difficult to scale back up also because of the amount of regulation and safety and security protocols that go into operating aircraft for any airline, right? So I think it's not just a matter, even if you had a supply of qualified candidates, there's still a lot of certification and training that needs to go into ensuring that pilot knows how to operate that aircraft for that airline. So there is going to be that sort of regulatory impact on increasing supply.
Yeah, and there's regulations to how long a pilot can work for, in a shift, that are really strict. And so some of the other challenges we've talked about, then that has the snowball effect. And so if your flight is sitting on a tarmac for 4 hours, the pilot is sitting there on the plane with you and may not be able to then turn around and do his next flight. And that can really cause problems for a lot of flights after that.
All right, I have another question. One of our attendees is very agitated about the status of Nexus. Nexus is the program, of course, that allows for rapid movement across the Canada-US border if you have a Nexus card. This person says that kiosks don't work, system is weak, hard to obtain cards, hard to get renewed cards. I know there are some negotiation issues that Canada and the US have faced. I don't know if that's part of it. Do any of you have any insights about what's going on with Nexus?
Yeah, the US refuses to reopen the Canadian-based Nexus offices because they want the same legal protections afforded to those officers who work in those offices as they get at the pre-clearance at the airports. In other words, they get diplomatic immunity at the pre-clearance at the airports, and they're not getting that in the Nexus offices, some of which are off-site, like in Mississauga in Toronto. So they're at a stalemate. But having said that, I applied for my card. I was accepted. The only thing I'm waiting for is an interview, and they're allowing me to use that card on a temporary basis. They're extending the ability for me to use it. So, and I think some people may be in the same situation. There's also Global Entry, which is a parallel program to Nexus, which you can use going into the US from another country rather than Canada. It's different than Nexus. So that also gives you another option.
Patty, I see you're back. Any comments? Yeah, jump in.
Sorry, I missed a good part of the question. So,
well, we were talking about Nexus, but we were also talking about what's changed around travel. So if you wanted to talk on that more general issue, we'd be very interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, so what's changed around travel is, so maybe the connection wasn't good. So what we're noticing is changed around travel is we're noticing a lot of people taking those special trips, those long trips, those large trips. The one thing that we're noticing too in the travel insurance industry is the interest in insurance itself. The conversation is now starting with a client. The conversation with our brokers, with our phone advisors, is taking longer because clients are no longer just accepting what's being offered to them. They are actually interested in understanding the coverage they have, how it's going to cover them. The other thing too is ourselves as an underwriter, there is now more of an appetite to look at covering situations just like a pandemic, where we now have more appetite to look at covering more than just the level 2 advisory, looking at level 3 and how our clients can be protected. So we are definitely seeing those trends, but what we have noticed the most is really the value that customers are now placing on travel insurance going forward. And I think that trend is going to continue as well.
And Katie, I just want to make sure that I've properly understood the COVID coverage element. So let me start with you on a question around that. So when somebody is taking out a travel insurance policy, if there is a level 4 advisory around traveling to a certain place, or because, for example, because of COVID or any situation, that is where that would not get covered, correct? But that is not the situation currently. So because there's no longer a level 4 advisory, is it a correct statement to say that if you take out travel insurance and you get COVID, you will be covered in most policies?
Correct. And it's a good point you bring up, because we've noticed that as the advisory levels move down, it was really difficult to get our clients, even our agents and brokers, to understand that you no longer had to sell specific COVID coverage, because as we move down the advisory level list, COVID now becomes an illness like another medical condition that you might have whilst on your trip.
So it's no longer excluded. It no longer requires a specific
policy. Because there is no advisory against it. Some people are choosing to play it safe. What if this and that happened? But to your point, because we're back to normal level advisory, there is no longer a necessity to purchase specific and special COVID coverage.
And
so
Elliot,
the standard medical
that,
policy would cover that.
Thank you, Katia. That's very helpful. And Elliot, I know we were talking the other day about, there's travel medical insurance in case you get ill. There's also cancellation insurance where you can't go on the trip because often it's because somebody has died in your family, but it could be because of something like COVID, and it has resulted in, for example, maybe you're in a country and you get sick and you need to stay longer, and there are insurance policies that would cover that. Could you tell us where COVID fits on that, and where COVID still has a sort of requirement to take out unique insurance, or is that completely not the case anymore?
Well, I think it's going to vary across the industry landscape. So I think that from a travel advisory perspective, as Katia mentioned, the impact of the move down that advisory table from level 4 to level 3 and so on is going to impact some of the responses to queries about what coverage is necessary. But I think it's important to know that insurers are still going to offer different types of products and services. And so that's why it's really important that as a consumer that you're doing your research. Speaking with agents, as I mentioned, from talking to our members, there's a lot more time being spent at point of sale in order to ensure that the types of risks that individuals are looking to get covered for are actually covered, and that there's no misunderstanding of what type of coverage is being purchased.
And Elliot, I'm going to follow up on that with another question for you coming from the audience, and I'm going to read this excellent point. It might be inaccurate to state that you do not need special COVID coverage, as some carriers choose to specifically exclude COVID-19 as a disease, regardless of advisory clauses. So this individual ends by saying you have to carefully read the wording of your policy. So there are some carriers, Elliot, that are not covering COVID?
Yeah, I think that's why, just, to reiterate the point, I think it's really important that anybody who's planning to travel does their due diligence and does speak with an advisor, or does read through the policy wording to ensure that the particular circumstances of their trip and their own health profile are covered by the type of insurance coverage that they're purchasing. So, there's a wide spectrum of products that are on offer, various types of coverages that are being made available in the marketplace. And I think, it's going to be up to an individual's, risk acumen and circumstances to get the right type of coverage.
Yeah, and I have another point from the audience, and I know we have quite a few THEA members, so I think we have quite a few people in the industry, so which is very helpful, as each of you is. I want to ask if you want to comment on this. It says, coverage varies by company, as some companies have put into exclusions that if the level 4 advisory is specific to COVID, they would still cover travel, while if it's for something else, coverage might not be provided. Katia, any thoughts on that? And then I'll ask you, Sheila, to jump in.
Yeah, so I didn't understand the last point. So what? So if there is a level 4, that they would specifically exclude COVID?
They would still cover COVID, but maybe not other diseases.
Okay, so yeah, so I haven't come across such a policy, but like to Elliot's point, it's important to read the coverage you have. So there might be some carriers who choose to do that, but most from what I've seen from other policies is once there is a level 4, you do need a specific rider, a specific COVID coverage policy to have that coverage when you travel.
And Sheila, do you want to jump in on this? And there's another specific question that you might want to comment on as well, which is COVID coverage for trip cancellation. Again, I know that varies depending on the policy, but the issue here is there a, is COVID treated differently for trip cancellation at this time? Sheila?
Yeah, so over just to add to the previous question first, that there might be policies where I just wanted to clarify, I think we were maybe phrasing the question a bit backwards. If there was a restriction for a level 4 advisory and you were traveling and you became ill from a different condition other than COVID, you would still be covered, even though there was that level 4 advisory in some situations. I think that might have been the intent of that question. I'm not sure. As far as trip cancellation, so, just to repeat again and again, a point that a lot of us have made, like read the policies really carefully, because trip cancellation due to COVID is a pretty broad statement. If you were ill and not able to travel because of COVID, you may qualify for, the trip cancellation coverage you have, depending on your policy wording. If it was staff shortages at an airline, you'd probably be advised to go to the airline first, as there are regulations for, in Canada now, that if a flight is canceled, and they can't rebook you within 48 hours, they would reimburse you, and that's for any reason within or outside of the airline's control. So an insurer would likely advise you to go to that first. So that could be a COVID reason too. So you could have lots of different coverage through different, maybe your employer, maybe you've bought private insurance, maybe you have some under a credit card, and the coverage could be different in all of the policies. So it's really important to read the wording.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We have another question from the audience that is more general, and it's about the next big event, COVID-23 or a different pandemic or some other major issue. And the question is, what are your views about how government will respond the next time there's such an event? Will we see border closings and stay-at-home mandates, or is the government just sort of blocked politically from taking that sort of action in future because of societal responses? David, let me start with you on that.
Yeah, well, I hope we've learned something, Keith, from this experience. It was a very mixed bag of responses the first 6 months. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, it won't help you, oh, it's essential. So my basic premise is we're going to start off from a much higher place. Now, depending on the severity of the virus, it's going to require a different response. I think the world tends to follow the US or Australia or Canada or the UK in terms of what is best to do. But I think we're going to be better prepared. And I think we're going to be more scientific in our evaluation and the prescriptions we come out and how we should handle it.
Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I think although we'd hope that we wouldn't have the same level of shutdown that we had, we're also more prepared for it. We're quite confident in switching to working remotely full time, and we've sort of learned from the past experience, so it might be easier to flip back into that. But hopefully, like David said, with a little more control the first time around, and not flipping back and forth on policies.
Katia, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, and I'm thinking that with to David's point is we're starting from a higher plane. So if I would hope that even if there was the next a big event, that maybe our vaccination rates, maybe it's not going to be as severe that we would never get to a point where we have to completely shut down, because we as a population are better able to stave off the viruses and not have our hospitals, our emergency rooms be as inundated as they were before. So I would hope that everything that we've done in the last 2 years would really have us better prepared to deal with with whatever comes next, and that it would never be as I'm going to say dramatic as it was before, because maybe COVID is turning into a very, very bad flu. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but yeah, I'm very optimistic that we wouldn't have to be to the levels we were at the last time it happened.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Katia. What about you, Ellie? Are you optimistic?
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic in a more, coordinated and unified response. Obviously it was unprecedented in the sense that it hadn't happened in over 100 years, right? So I think if something were to happen in the near future, we would have the past experiences and lessons learned to go off of how we go about making decisions. What those decisions would be, it's impossible to predict. Entirely circumstantial to what would happen and the severity of it.
Now, I want to ask a specific question about masks. I mean, we're in this interesting period right now where we're learning what changes will endure and what changes won't. I was talking before the webinar started with the panelists about, probably 2 years ago, the men in this webinar would have been wearing a tie. And I've certainly noticed a more informality in terms of dress, business dress. Now, whether that will endure or not clear. And there are so many other areas where we're going to see over the next months and years what will stay changed and what will revert back to the way it was before. Many predicted that masks would become common in enclosed areas like airplanes, and yet that doesn't seem to be the case. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that and why. Katia, do you want to start us off?
I'll give a personal experience about masks. Recently took a trip, and so I was flying from Canada, connecting through Europe, and then flying to Africa. And it was interesting, anywhere from Canada all the way to Europe, nothing about mask mandates. But when I got on a plane to connect from Europe to Africa, the country I was traveling to had a mask mandate that everybody on the airplane had to be masked. So I have noticed as well that people, we want to get back to normal. We want to feel like, yes, COVID happened, we got over it, let us get back to normal. You're seeing that even how before you used to like fist bumps, but I'm noticing a lot of people more and more willing to hug. The fact that we also trust, especially in Canada, we have one of the highest vaccination rates. We are confident in what 2 doses, a booster, a 4th dose is doing. So I think people are wanting to go back to normal, and mask is one of the reminders of COVID. And I'm seeing less and less of the masks being used as life resets to the new normal.
Interesting.
What
Elliot,
I have
what are your
noticed
thoughts?
is that the people who are wearing masks is maybe when you are sick, when you're feeling a cold coming on, people
Yeah.
are tending to wear masks to protect others, not so much to protect themselves. So that kind of awareness of what a mask does to protect the population around you. But
It may be
in
also so that
general,
people don't hear you cough, because I've noticed anytime you cough in a room,
exactly.
everybody stares at you.
It stares at you. So yeah, so we definitely want to get away from masks. Yeah.
Elliot?
So I'm going to just tie this back to a couple of Thea's golden rules, which are, know your trip and know your health, right? So what Katia just said, where, different countries are going to have different mandates. I think it's really important that before departure, if you're planning to travel, you do look up what the requirements and regulations are for the place that you're going. And that's not just related to COVID-19, that's related to anything that could be, happening at your destination. And then know your health. And I think it's really important that individuals are, taking it seriously, what their pre-departure health status is. And I would say that, frankly, I think that more individuals are paying more attention to it. That's one of the, external, I think, impacts of COVID-19 is that there is a heightened public awareness of individuals' health. I would say, if anything, so I mean, I just flew back from Europe a couple of weeks ago, and I was surprised at how many people were wearing masks, not just in airports, in airplanes, but also where I was in Europe. There's a lot of individuals still wearing health, and if anything, that tells me that people are encouraged to travel in spite of whatever health risk might exist. So I think people are looking at what health and safety measures they can take to enable them to continue to do something that they hadn't been able to do from a regulatory perspective in the past.
Thanks, Elliot. Sheila, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I was surprised to see how quickly people dropped the mask, because during when there was a mask mandate in Canada, people were commenting on how less frequently they were getting colds and flus and things like that. So they were like, masks are going to be great forever to protect us from a lot of different conditions. And so it's surprising that people aren't, and yet they have really changed some habits. So people are more likely to call in sick if they were supposed to go in person to an event or a work day, and just, recognize they shouldn't be going out in public if they're sick. So that can be a positive thing. And, we'll see over the winter with not just COVID, but other colds and flus, if people start to think, oh, maybe I should be going back to wearing masks or not.
Okay, great. I'm going to take one last quick poll. Despite the fact that Canada, the US, and most other countries have lifted their mask mandates for public airline travel, will you be traveling if you are traveling by air over the winter fall of 2022-23, will you continue to wear a mask when on a plane? And just as we wait for the answers, we only have 1 minute. You've been a great panel. I've already gotten several comments about how insightful the panel has been. So I want to thank all of you. I just want to ask you to end after I launch the poll results with just your final thoughts on anything covered today or anything not. Your final words of wisdom. So first, I'll end the poll, and interestingly enough, 60% of the people on the call said they would continue to wear a mask on a plane, which is certainly not what I've observed in terms of the number of people on a plane that are wearing them. So very interesting, and may speak to the fact that these are experienced people in the travel area. Let me start with you, Katia, for final comment.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. Like the saying goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So I really think that coming out of the pandemic, renewed interest in travel. We're calling it revenge travel, but just that renewed sense of travel now, don't wait, check off items from your bucket list. And coming at it from an insurance perspective, insurance has always been valuable. You don't need to have a pandemic to need insurance. It has kind of educated the population as to the need, because you never know what's going to happen. So really very optimistic, a very optimistic outlook for travel and travel insurance as well. So
thank you, Katia. Elliot?
Yeah, I guess final thoughts are it's encouraging to see folks out traveling again. And I think even more so, it's encouraging to see folks getting insured and getting the right type of coverage for the type of travel that they're going to be doing. So yeah, would encourage individuals to get out and travel to their heart's content, but also to, follow Thea's golden rules, know your trip, know your health, know your policy, know your rights, and all of those things, they exist for a reason. It's really important that people are able to celebrate the fact they can travel again and do so with safety and peace of mind.
Thank you. Sheila?
Yeah, and about everything we talked about today, it's, know before you go. Make sure you understand any, read the travel advisories, know what you're getting into, know what to do if something does happen, whether your trip's canceled or delayed, or someone in your party becomes ill while you're away. Know all of this before you leave, so you're ready for anything.
Excellent. Final word to you, David.
Keep traveling. There's a great world out there. Share it with the people you love, your family, your partner, but be careful. Use common sense. I mean, just think about where you're going and what precaution you need to take, and take it, and don't over worry about it. Enjoy it. Don't let this fear of COVID ruin your ability to see this great world.
Well, that's a great last word. And I'll end by saying happy traveling, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us in this webinar. Thank you to the 4 panelists who've been just terrific. I can't thank you enough. And thank you to all the attendees. We enjoyed having you on the webinar today. We're going to have another webinar next month. Keep an eye open for it, and we'll continue to have a series of webinars in 2023, and we hope that you can participate in those as well. So let me end by saying thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.